Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I call the high-level dialogue session of the regional meeting to order. Our subject for this session is inclusive growth for social justice. A background note on this has been posted on the regional meeting website for a number of weeks. As the paper points out, the region of Asia, Pacific, and the Arab states has made considerable progress over the last few decades, with growth far exceeding the global average and poverty having more than halved. Nevertheless, persistent inequalities and decent work deficits raise the question of whether social justice is moving forward. The purpose of this session is therefore to discuss and explore ways in which the ILO can support its constituents in implementing a decent work paradigm that promotes inclusive and job-rich growth. Coordinated policies, robust labor market institutions, and strong social dialogue and tripartism are critical aspects of this. Allow me briefly to explain the proceeding to you before I hand over to Ms. Saranjit Lail, the beautiful woman here, beautiful lady, whom I am sure you know as a regular senior BBC reporter on the Asia Business Report and on the World Business Report, who will moderate the discussions. A warm welcome to you, Ms. Lail. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Our distinguished panel consists of ILO Director General, Mr. Ryder, Government Representative, His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah bin Nasser al-Bakri, Minister of Manpower of Oman, Employers Representative, Ms. Linda Kromjong, Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers, and Mr. Felix President of the ITUC Asia Pacific, representing the workers. We shall also profit from the presence of Mr. Vivek Puthucode, General Manager for the Public Sector, Microsoft APAC Singapore. Following the panel discussion, the floor will be opened for questions and comment from participants, and then there will be a last round of contributions from the panelists, answering queries or in response to points raised from the floor. With that, I shall hand over to Ms. Lail, the moderator for this session, and I and my team have to go down to be with you. Please, Ms. Lail.
Well, terima kasih Bapak Menteri. Saya senang sekali kembali bisa di Pulau Bali indah. So ladies and gentlemen, of course, it is absolutely wonderful to be on this stunningly beautiful island. But as you heard during the opening sessions, there are some very pressing things that we need to discuss. And massive challenges indeed. So we'll just give a few minutes until we all get our technology in order. We all have our microphones. Perfect. They're all working. Wonderful. Well, I thought I'd sum up again some of the issues we heard earlier during the opening session. 2.2 billion, possibly more. That's the number of people who are going to be part of the labor force by 2030. 249 million jobs are going to have to be created to cater to that growing need. But will they be good jobs? Will they be jobs that come with the social protections that are required in order for people to have the right to decent work? So this will be one of the questions we're hoping to answer in this high-level panel, which is going to focus on the challenges ahead and the policies required to create better jobs, developing the workforce skills needed for economic development, and strengthening the social dialogue so it supports inclusive growth. So once again, I'd like to introduce all our panelists and tell you a little bit more about them. Of course, some of them are very familiar to you, but I thought it's a good way to go through their various backgrounds and to discuss what they bring to this particular session. So we'll start with someone who's no stranger to all of you. You've already heard him speak. The Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Guy Ryder. He's the 10th Director General of the organization. He brings, of course, to this discussion a wealth of expertise, previously involved with international trade union confederations. He was elected DG in 2012 and has pledged to position the organization as a determined actor, translating principle into action and ensuring that it has the capacity to make a major difference to the working lives of millions around the world. And he'll bring with him intimate knowledge of the ILO's fundamental principles and the work it's doing to try to bring this about. Next, of course, we have our government panelists, the Honorable Sheikh Abdullah bin Nasser al-Bakri, the Minister of Manpower from Oman. Now, he has an MA in Management Studies from the UK. He's got an understanding of the inner workings of the Omani government, having first been appointed way back in the early 1990s as a Director General of Regional Municipalities and the Environment, and then later on went to become Director General of Technical Affairs before moving on to Water Resources Affairs, where he would later become the Undersecretary for Water Resources. He was appointed Minister of Manpower in 2008. So he's been doing this job for quite some time. And then we have our employer panelists, Linda Kromjong, Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. She took up her post in May of last year, heading the organization's Geneva-based secretariat. We know the IOE is the world's largest private sector network. It has more than 150 national business and employer organization members. It represents the voice of business on social and labor policy, with standing in the International Labour Organization, across the UN, and multilateral systems in the G20 and other emerging global forums. Next to her, we have worker panelists who you already heard from earlier, Mr. Felix Anthony, the President of the International Trade Union Confederation for Asia Pacific. He is a Fijian trade unionist as well as a politician, and he's here, of course, representing the Confederation, which calls itself the voice, the global voice of the world's working people, and its primary mission is to promote and defend workers' rights and interests through international cooperation between trade unions and global campaigning. And finally, we have Mr. Vivek Puthucode. He is the General Manager for Public Sector for Microsoft Asia Pacific. He's the public sector business leader for the firm in this region, responsible for all aspects of business, driving Microsoft's strategy and execution in the public sector. He leads a team of public sector professionals across areas of government, health, education, public safety, and national security. He's got more than 18 years' experience in delivering ICT projects and programs to public sector agencies, and has served on a member of various steering committees and project governance boards to advise and guide ICT projects in government agencies in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, you've heard me introduce all of them to you, and I told you a little bit about what they do, but I thought I'd start by asking each of you briefly to tell us how you see yourself fitting into this conversation, how you're all working towards inclusive growth for social justice, which is, of course, the title of this high-level plenary. Now, Mr. Ryder, we heard from you a little bit earlier. You can sum up quickly, but we can go through with the rest of the panelists. Well, why don't you start? Because this is a crucial topic. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the opening session, but how are you working towards it specifically?
Yeah, thanks very much, and good afternoon. Is this working? Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody. I think in your introduction, you really pointed the way that the ILO sees its role in this process. You know, we need to be an actor, not an observer or a commentator. And I think this is extremely important an organization which is nearly 100 years old, which has this rather special tripartite composition, which you see in the hall, I think has to demonstrate that we're not simply in the business of preaching values, preaching principles. Important that those values and principles are, but I think that we have to demonstrate that we're capable of translating those objectives, those high values, into practical action. And I think that it's a joint responsibility, actually, of both the ILO and everybody sitting in this hall to really answer the question of, well, what's going to work? What practically can we do to actually bring about inclusive growth, to generate decent work? And that has to be a sort of a synthesis of the, I think, different, quite legitimately different perspectives and interests that employers bring to the table, that trade unions bring to the table, and the responsibilities of government. Now, some would see in that task a sort of an impossible puzzle to solve. I don't believe that. I don't believe that the gross sum of the contributions of employers, workers, and governments is zero. I actually think there is to use the cliche, very much a win-win-win option out there if we can find the way to it. But the road can often be a difficult one, it can be a complex one, and I think that's the business that the ILO is in.
أسعد الله مساكم جميعا. اسمحوا لي أن أتحدث بالعربي. الحقيقة نثمن هذا اللقاء وهذا التجمع في جمهورية إندونيسيا، ونشكر المحضرين لهذا الجمع الطيب، ونشيد بالجهود المقدمة من منظمة العمل الدولية. وأنا أعتقد أكبر التحديات أمامنا مثل ما ذكرت في تقرير المدير العام والكلمات التي قدمت في الجلسة الافتتاحية لهذا الإقليم تحديات كبيرة بالنسبة للمخرجات، بالنسبة لفرص التشغيل، وليس التشغيل فقط وإنما التحدي.
However, our endeavors are also essential for decent work for any person seeking a job. In Oman, in our ministry, we concern ourselves with employment in the private sector, as well as provide technical and vocational training and technical assistance for the labor market. And I hope through this dialogue we shall be able to come out with good conclusions which will serve our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. The International Organization of Employers has one of its roles as being the secretariat of the employers group within the International Labour Organization. So that's partly why we're here. We're also here because we represent business worldwide, and one of our members here is Apindo, very active, very proud about the role that you're taking here today and the rest of the coming days. At the core, say, of being, say, the global voice of business is what we call sustainable enterprises. Enterprises are here for the short and as well for the long term. If we then make the connection towards the Sustainable Development Goals, where we see the Sustainable Development Goal is about opportunities, sustained inclusive growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And that's what business does create jobs. So without business, the Sustainable Development Goal 8, nor all the other goals will not be complemented, will not be implemented, will not be reached. One example we would like to give here about our commitment to this topic is that last year in October 2015, we concluded in Bahrain what we call the Bahrain Declaration. And I'm just going to read a few phrases out of the Bahrain Declaration, where we concluded the following: support for the Sustainable Development Goals and its readiness to work and cooperate at national and international level to reach the targets, commitment to engage with trade unions and all other stakeholders in dialogue and negotiations that contribute to more and better jobs, growth and prosperity, and endorsement of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the ILO M&E Declaration, and firm commitment to their implementation. So that's the commitment of the employers community worldwide, and that's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. In the ILO context, the 2008 ILO Declaration on Social Justice for Fair Globalization does express that in line with decent work agenda, all member organizations must pursue policies based on strategic objectives. And these objectives are employment, social protection, social dialogue, and rights at work. These objectives are inseparable, and they are interrelated and mutually supportive. And what we believe is that inclusive growth for social justice is based on the premise that no one will be left behind, and that all sections of the society and in the country get a fair share of the economic growth of the nation. And that is one reason why we do stress upon the importance of social dialogue. Tripartism is critical to achieving this social justice that we talk about. Also equally critical is the role of collective bargaining and freedom of association. You cannot have inclusive growth without collective bargaining. And this is what we insist on. This is what we promote, and we urge nations in this part of the world that they ratify these core conventions, which are 87 and 98.
Good afternoon, everyone. I believe data is a new currency. Data is a new oil, and data and information has the power to transform how we interact with each other, how we do business together, and how do we socially, as a society, evolve into a fair and just society, which is one of the objectives of Sustainable Development Goals. I represent Microsoft, and we have an initiative of public cloud for public good, which is how do we bring together collective resources. And this is across tech industry. Technology industry is super excited to present an opportunity for governments, for private sector, large corporations and small medium enterprises, and even individuals. How do we put the power of information in the hands of individuals, whether it's workers, students, or volunteers, or even government employees? How do we make this happen? And the point of view that I would bring today is to look at how technology can play. Where is technology today? And what is it that collectively we need to be aware of? And I agree with what was said earlier. Technology doesn't determine the future, but it can be a good help in making sure we pick the right future for us.
Well, thank you all panelists for your brief introductions, and you've all mentioned topics which we hope to get into in more detail just a little bit later. But let's start, of course, with policies, because ultimately it takes good policy to translate into good labor practices in each country. So in this regard, I will start with the Minister of Manpower from Oman, because ultimately you are overseeing government policy in your country. And we know that despite remarkable economic progress and growth in your region, we know that inequalities are continuing to grow. So what are the policy tools, including social insurance, protection for migrant workers, that can foster more equitable growth?
شكرا جزيلا. الحقيقة مثل ما تفضلتي كلنا نؤمن بالسياسات والقوانين والأنظمة التي تسن العلاقة
which regulate relations between production partners. This organization brings together all three. So it takes into account the interests of both production partners. We in Oman, but I believe not only in Oman, but all the countries of the Arab region, and more specifically the Gulf, we have in fact adopted many laws and legislations and regulations to govern these relations. The three production partners are now represented. Employers and workers, in fact, operate on the basis of regulations and through elections. Employers are represented, for example, by the Chamber of Commerce in Oman, the workers by the Confederation of the Sultanate of Oman in 2010, and His Excellency Ryder was present at that occasion. So we have a complete setup and organization. We, therefore, at the very beginning of our growth spurt, have adopted labor legislation and adapted so that it may deal with the basic measures of relationship between employers and employees, leave, maternity leave, working hours, anything related to working conditions, in addition to other matters related to the situation in our region. We have also, in fact, adapted our production legislation so that it may, in fact, be in harmony and take into account international legislation and regulations. The relationship now is clearly established, and there is full independence for the Chamber of Commerce and the General Confederation of Workers regarding the adoption of their legislation, as well as we guarantee their participation in adopting all future legislation. We have thus set up a comprehensive system which contributes stability of markets, labor markets on the one hand, as well as allow the business sector to be a sector that attracts business and capital under the supervision of national and international organizations. Such legislation is the basis for the next phase of progress. We are amongst countries which are seeking to adapt their legislation according to the next step and stage in our progress. The next stage of our progress requires us to adapt legislation so as to take into account new work opportunities and so that we may provide stable work opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So obviously you've given us a very good sense of what your government is doing and also the Gulf countries. But we know that, of course, government policy isn't quite enough. It has to be followed up by businesses who are mindful of that policy and also focused at the same time to try to make profits. We know that's really hard. Profits are proving elusive at this time of slowing global trade and many of the other challenges we face. So my next question now to Ms. Kromjong, which is really all about how domestic markets perhaps can help to balance the drivers of growth in a manner that can promote the sustainability of small, medium enterprises.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I think it's great also to follow up on the previous speaker who had highlighted the importance of having decent regulations in place. Because if we look into what we consider as being the drivers for growth, one of the foundations really, we need to have a stable, predictable and reliable regulatory framework in place, which is very important for business because business doesn't want to live in an unpredictable world. There's already enough unpredictable, so let's please keep our regulations in place. We also would require a stable political environment. We also would need to have decent institutions in place that help business to support in its course of being profitable, but also by creating jobs for our people. When these institutions are in place in countries and when we have ratified the core ILO conventions, and it was already said before in the speech of the DG that only 14 out of 47 countries here in Asia have ratified the core conventions, that is a concern. It helps business if countries and governments would take on, I would say, the call for action to start implementing that. It also will help business if countries will take on their responsibility as a result of the adaptation of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the adaptation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business Human Rights, to put in place national action plans that really address the issues of concern for society, for business, as well as, I would say, for the institutions. If we have all this in place, innovation can kick in because we will then be able to attract investment, and investment is needed to grow and to grow the economy. Coming back to your question regarding the small and medium enterprises, what I think is relevant to share here is that small and medium enterprises are the engine of growth domestically. And I know that very often we talk about global supply chains and their relevance, and that's all true, but the reality is also that only 20% of the workforce is in global supply chain. So 80% is domestically working, and I think if you look into the numbers, there is a huge portion of the workforce even in informality there. So we need to focus on the domestic markets to really kickstart and grow further the economy here, What we would need to do as well in establishing an environment for SMEs to flourish is help them to understand their obligations, help them to build their capacity in what they should adhere to, help them to understand that they are living in a world where it is really, with high expectation to all companies. It doesn't matter whether a company is large or small, it doesn't matter whether a company works nationally or internationally, it doesn't matter if it's a private company or whether it's a state-owned company. Responsibilities are there, and stakeholders' responsibilities and expectations are becoming very, very high. And also SMEs need to live up to those standards. They need to understand the environment, they need to know what's happening within their environment, they need to show that they're doing the right things, and they need to be given the tools to be innovative and creative and be entrepreneurial. And coming back to, I'd say, this region, whenever I arrive in one of those beautiful countries here in Asia or in the Middle East, the one thing that you sense is this entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of things might be in informality, but people are really trying to improve their lives. We are working very hard. They're looking into very creative solutions to earn a living. And I think that is something that is, for me, a great foundation that in the end, Asia can also achieve that. Thank you.
A very positive note there you've sounded, but of course you've laid out all the challenges as well. I'm sure, Mr. Anthony, even though you're both on opposing sides somewhat, would agree with many of the things you said. I mean, the concerns around informal workers, we know about 1 billion of them in this particular region, which Mr. Ryder mentioned earlier as well. They're all in vulnerable employment, unpaid family workers, migrant workers, the youth, child laborers, refugees, who represent about 1 in 2 workers in this region alone. Of course, many of these workers are informally employed and have limited access to legal or social protection, and that's what you're looking out for to a great degree as well. But can you tell us how much some of these conventions, we know only a few countries in this region have ratified the ILO's 8 core conventions, but how can international labor standards, the fundamental principles and rights at work help to improve the quality of jobs and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals related to poverty and decent work for all? How do we protect these billion people out there with no sense of protection at all?
Thank you. First of all, let me just comment on my colleague, the way she left off, that it's businesses also would want to see an environment where we have stable industrial relations climate as well. Of course, that contributes to greater productivity as well. And for that to happen, social dialogue, as we said, is essential. The right to collective bargaining, freedom of association, these are essentials. These are bare essentials. And of course, we talk about how are these labor standards going to impact the people that we represent. People who are at the bottom of the ladder, majority of them who are still struggling to get up the ladder. And let me say that for the region, we've already talked about the low ratification levels in terms of labor standards, and in many countries who have already ratified the core conventions, we see very poor compliance of these conventions, and even, in fact, in countries where we have laws, the enforcement itself is weak. This needs to be strengthened. And in this respect, the ILO supervisory mechanism is important. It has delivered for some countries who have diligently pursued their complaints with the supervisory unit to get governments to comply, one, with the conventions, to ensure that the laws are in compliance with the conventions, and of course, put into practice what the laws actually say. These, they do make a difference, but in the region itself, as we've mentioned, we have serious issues in the region. One of forced labor, where we still continue. We talk about 11.5 million people in forced labor in this region. We talk about 78 million children at work in this region. I don't think that's anything for the region to be proud of. And not only that, but what we see in the region is that the situation seems to be deteriorating. Look, for instance, in India on child labor. While we have been trying to combat and to manage this huge problem, we have the Indian government imposing new laws that actually redefine what a family is. And in the past, the family was just the nuclear family. Now the family is the brothers and sisters, the parents, brothers and sisters. So we now have an extended family where the child can work for. What this would do is actually going to make the problem worse. We will see an increase in child labor in this area, right? Similarly, when we talk about poverty, I know there's been a lot of talk about this region doing very well in getting people out of poverty. But let's be real. The poverty line, as we see it today, is at $1.90 US a day. And we don't believe that's real. We don't believe that's a real line or measure of whether one is in poverty or one has graduated to the middle class. Yeah? Let me also say that just a few years back, the poverty line was at $2 US a day. The UN revised this rate to $1.90. And as a result, millions of people overnight went over the poverty line and became middle-class people. But these are just numbers. Let's look at the real situation on the ground. They are the same people. They struggle to make ends meet. They struggle to put food on the table. They live in slums. They work from morning to night, usually long hours, right? They don't have a choice. So, in actual fact, when we talk about people moving up the ladder, it has to be in real terms. It just simply can't be by way of numbers where we've got so many people up in the middle class. They're the same people. They still do the same thing. They have the same struggles. Yeah? So we need to look at the situation on the ground. And what we see on the ground is that it's actually getting worse. We talk about formal and informal economy. We get more people, instead of getting the informal economy into the formal, we are seeing a reverse of that. Why? Because we have more contract workers. Yeah? The supply chain we talk about. There's hardly, it's difficult in this day and age to even identify who the employer is in many cases. Look at the Rana Plaza in Pakistan. Yeah? When that tragedy occurred, many families could not claim compensation because they simply could not prove that those workers who had died were actually employed by the employer because there was no contracts in place. And that still exists today. So there are many examples of this. So what we're seeing in this region is that we are not making any progress in real terms in ensuring that the workers are better off. They're actually, they actually are worse off in many instances. So I'll stop there.
All right, now before I move on to Mr. Puthucode, obviously you've brought up a lot of issues there, one of which is potentially this accusation that the UN is massaging numbers to try to get people out of poverty, to lift people out of poverty. I wondered, Mr. Ryder, if you wanted to respond to that, what you thought of some of those issues. Yeah? And then we can move on to technology, which we know is a great disruptor.
Look, I'll come briefly, and I'd like to come back to some of the points that have been raised when I make my intervention. The World Bank, in fact, has reset its poverty sort of threshold level at 190, extreme poverty, at $190 per day. Now, the point, I think, is this, and we know that one worker in 10 in this region isn't able, although working, is not able to get beyond that poverty threshold. Now, I wouldn't obsess on the definitions because it's true. You can have different views about what the appropriate level would be. And that would be a very long and a very highly technical debate. I think we would be, frankly, doing better to reorient our thinking towards, well, what are we trying to aim at in a decent work agenda? And, you know, there is a concept which is very much in the news right now in many countries, which is the notion of a living wage. And it's seen as being something brand new. In the country which I come from, it's the subject of debate. It's interesting to note that the Constitution of the ILO in 1919 talks about a living wage. It's not a new concept, but it's one that really hasn't figured very prominently in debate over the decades. I think our objective is to make sure that all people in our societies are enabled through work to attain a satisfactory living, means of living decently with them and their family. Now that can be seen in different ways, and there are different ways of getting there, either through wages, through social protection systems. It's a big debate, but I think rather than sort of get hung up on the numbers, I think we just have to say, look, what we're aiming at, and when we use the word inclusive, I think it's implicit, is we want people to be sort of above a certain level which enables them to have a decent life, to be able to bring their families up in circumstances that none of us would be ashamed of. That all of us would say, yeah, if that were my family, I can live with it. So we're getting there.
Great, thank you for that. Well, let's move on to potentially one outlet that could be seen as a way for many of these billion people who are in the informal sector, who are in vulnerable employment, to try to get out of it, to try to lift themselves out of poverty. And one of those ways is really to get the required skills. And it's interesting because obviously I'm looking towards you, Mr. Puthucode. You're from a technology company, Microsoft, and we know that work skills development is a fundamental part of what you do with your employees, and certainly many other companies in the region, multinationals, governments are also trying to make this happen. So ultimately, I guess my question to you is, before we go into technology as the great disruptor, is who is in charge of providing the skills development? Is it big multinational firms like yours? Is it the onus of governments to do this, to help people get the right skills, to lift them out of poverty?
I think it's all of the above. It's certainly not any one particular segment's responsibility. I can say from an Asia perspective, Asians are generally aspirational, hungry. Hunger for growth is there. You go to any place in Indonesia, you go to a school in Indonesia, people are hungry for knowledge. They're hungry for opportunity. They want the same opportunity that exists anywhere else in the world. And we are seeing this in every part of Asia. So I think the government needs to step up and make it accessible. Access to education and skills is what governments can do best. Private sector can come up with the demand side of things and also the knowledge and content side of things. But to me, to answer your question, it's a case of how we can provide equity and access to education and right type of education, and which leads to the question of, right, what is the future of work going to look like?
Did you want to pick up on that, or shall I move to the minister? Because I know he's doing quite a lot on skills development as well in his country and in the Gulf, and then we can pick up with you, Mr. Ryder.
Before we delve into this subject, I would like to comment on what Ms. Linda Kromjong said. I think it is important that we look at stability as the magnet for attracting investment, attracting companies and their operations. But concomitant with that, we have to look at the participation of the social partners, workers and employers. They are the ones who will be able to do the footwork. I think it is important that the social partners also have their fair share of contributing to innovation and entrepreneurship. We in Oman have created a scientific council whereby youth are encouraged to work on new technology, to acquire new skills, and also to develop their own technology with the help of government grants. We also were able to create what we call an oasis of technology, a Silicon Valley, if you like, whereby developers of new technology will win government subsidies comparable with the amount that they can bring, or with the return they can bring on their innovation. I think it is important that all partners share their fair burden of the process. If we were to benefit from the role of SMEs, then they have to have the incentives that will make them give, that will make them contribute. And we in Oman, as a result of the policies that we have adopted, the number of SMEs increased from 78,000 to 160,000, and this is no small leap. We have introduced other measures like an independent body that would provide to SMEs and to encourage youth to develop startups, to operate as self-employed, and as a result, we end up with a registration of 43,000 independent workers, self-employed, and SMEs. We have made sure that all stakeholders are implicated in the process. In every turn, every corner, we made sure that there was consultations, that there were voices heard. We, as a government, we ensure that there is logistical support and that we give soft loans. Soft loans are given without interest or with very limited interest. And of course, this has given SMEs and new startups to win contracts with bigger companies. And of course, this leads me to the next point. The point relates to creating the environment that would protect the rights of workers. In the Arab world in general and the Gulf countries in particular, several pieces of legislation were introduced, laws were enacted to ensure that workers have a stable environment. We have social insurance, and we were able to find a way to include those working in the informal economy to enjoy protection. More than 10,000 workers were registered in Oman, and they enjoy a minimum of national insurance protection. We have also given incentives to workers who set up their own businesses, and by doing so, we were able to take them out of the informal economy. I think all these policies have proven their outcome, and I think we need to concentrate on such policies. It is important, as I said, that the social partners contribute to the process and we can have their feedback so that the government can align its policy as needed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was the many things your country has done, and I'm just curious to know, has it actually benefited? Have you seen a rise in employment, in the employment rate in Oman? Just very briefly, what is it currently?
Absolutely. The evaluation, the appraisal of the outcomes is continuous. We have seminars, we have meetings with the social partners, whereby we listen to their views on the measures adopted, and if there were any shortcomings or any gaps that needed to be addressed, then we do that. And in Oman, we're proud that we were able to create important.
All right, thank you for that. I was just curious to see if your employment rate has gone up as a result. But I guess, Mr. Ryder, you had some things you wanted to mention in just, there's a lot of things that we brought up here. I want to get into technology as well, which is crucial. It's the big transformative platform that we're seeing. But just some comments from what we've heard so far.
Yeah, thanks. Indeed, we've heard some really very, very important issues raised. Shall I start with technology to bring it into the conversation? Vivek's already done it somewhat. It's notorious now. You can't really go anywhere to an international meeting without hearing about the fourth industrial revolution, which is breaking upon us. It's either happening or about to happen, depending on who you speak to. And there are obviously, some very far-reaching forecasts about what the impact of this fourth industrial revolution are going to be on the world of work. That conversation normally starts with the equation of creation and destruction. Almost by definition, technological innovation is going to create new jobs and it will destroy existing jobs. The question is whether the balance sheet will come out positive or come out negative. This is what people ask. The optimists, if I can put it in those terms, say, well, have a look at history. If you look at the previous 3 revolutions, it worked out fine. There's a period of turbulence, there's a period of adjustment, but if you sort of fasten your safety belt and hold on there, in the end, our societies end up more prosperous, and there are more jobs available and better jobs. I think the $64 million question is it different this time? Do the technologies which are coming into the world of work actually offer a slightly less positive prospect than history would suggest? And the fact of the matter is, and Vivek, you probably got some insights into this, there's a massive diversity of opinion. My personal view is that nobody's in possession of the truth on this question, because it isn't just the technologies themselves that will determine where we're going. It is both how we manage those technologies, and whilst I would agree that standing in the way of technological development is rather like standing and hoping the tide won't come in. It's going to happen. But it is in our capacity, and I think it's a responsibility of policymakers, to manage those technologies to best social advantage. And some of the predictions being made, I think, remove the variable of human agency, what we intend to do. This is not, in the end, just about technology. It's about policies and the policies that we introduce. But certainly, there are countries around the world who are already engaged on a discussion about Industry 4.0, tends to be the debate. And I just want to add a dimension to that debate, which is not just about the numbers of jobs created and destroyed. It's about, and I think, Vivek, you were sort of touching on this, it's about the potential, at least, for the incoming technologies to transform the way work is organized. I mean, we're seeing the appearance of the platform economy attracts enormous attention. Wherever I go, Uber just seems to have got there before me. And there's a massive debate about whether it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it should be banned, it should be encouraged. Now, the question I ask myself is this platform economy just anecdotal? They're just niches that will appear in a spotty way around the world of work? Or is it a precursor of the way we're going to work much more generally in the future? And if you take that latter point of view, then we're in for a real rough ride, because it means that the institutions of the labor market, the way we make policy, the way policy work, predicated on the notion of an employer-employee labor relationship, sort of goes out the window, because work will be rather in the framework of sort of episodic commercial exchanges between people who want a service or a good and those who can provide it. It's a commercial transaction, and it's transitory, and it means the way we organize social protection, the way we organize income distribution. I mean, this is a change we haven't seen the like of. So all of that about technology. So to sort of use a buzzword here, if we're on the sort of the verge of Industry 4.0, and just sort of changing gear here, there are those who believe we're also on the verge of globalization 2.0. That is to say, and here I go into the political debate, questions really are being raised now about whether, you know, the model of globalization, which for the last 30 years or so has been seen as an automatic given in the world of work, is actually now going to change. Now, the end of the current model of globalization has already been confidently predicted in 2008. When the crisis hit in 2008, politicians around the world in the G20 said, this model of globalization has to stop, it's run out of steam, we're going to something different. And guess what? It didn't really happen. They put the financial system back on the rails, and we've more or less continued as before with the results that we've seen, and you can have different views on that. But I think we really have to consider if current, and I stress this, political developments are going to actually make globalization 2.0 a reality, and if so, what that's going to look like and where our interests lie. And let me try and relate that to the purposes of our meeting here. You know, trade. You know, if there's one region that's been brilliant in the open trading system and benefited from it and outstripped everybody else, it's been the Asian Pacific region. If that open trading system now has a very big political question mark beside it, we have to think through what the consequences of that are. If you want to preserve an open trading system, what will it take? If that looks in danger, what options do you have? And we've already seen economies in this part of the world asking themselves if the export-driven models of, you know, turbo growth and industrialization, which we've seen, has already run its course. And if you take that view, and this might be independent of what happens in the global policy debate, then you've got to look at your own markets. You've got to look at the capacity of your own people to take the place of export markets. And that takes us into the field of social protection. It takes us into the field of minimum wages. It takes us into the field of bringing all of those institutions and inclusive processes into play in this region in ways which actually help ensure the continued dynamism of this region rather than constituting an obstacle to its success. So to close, and I've been rather long, you know, I think there are moments, and you know, a 100-year-old organization has lived them. You see moments of rupture, you see moments of change historically. And if I say the dates, you'll understand what I mean. 1929, a crash. 1945, the post-Second World War dispensations, which are still with us. 1989, 1990, enter the Cold War. And now 2008, 2016. I think this marks, for the reasons I've said, Industry 4.0, Globalization 2.0, a moment of rupture, a moment when this type of debate is going to be center stage in our thinking and our policy development. And, you know, where more important than here at the heart of the success story of globalization so far.
Oh my, that was a very broad-ranging answer, but a moment of rupture. Gosh, we seem to be at the cusp of something here. And I just wanted to pick up on what you said about technology. You seem to be a little bit doubtful, from what I sense, on you know, its ability to really be transformative. Is that right? You said earlier in your speech that technology is at the heart of change, but it will not decide everything.
You know, I don't think our future is written in the stars or by technology. I resist the tech. I mean, I'm not anti. I don't want to give the wrong idea. Technology is going to be vitally important, but I'm not a so-called techno-determinist because the danger of taking that type of view is it leads to policy paralysis. You know, say, well, it's going to happen to us. Let's just wait for it to happen. I think we have to have the ambition, and I don't underestimate the difficulties involved, of saying this technology is coming in. It's got enormous potential to better societies, to give us new opportunities. but it won't be automatic. It depends on what we do about it. So, yeah, it can be great, but we have to make it great.
All right, well, I'll let Mr. Puthucode pick up on that, because obviously you're Microsoft. You've got a sense of having to retaliate to that. Isn't technology this big transformative platform? It was meant to disrupt. It was meant to create jobs as well as skills for many of the youth out there. So tell us what your firm is doing specifically.
Well, if I disagree with the Director General, that's probably not a good sign. But it'll be like one hand clapping, right? Technology is not the answer. Technology is part of the answer. It's everything else that needs to be there. But I want to share the extent of disruption that's happening. Look at the problem statement. We need to have 249 million jobs in Asia-Pac, in Arab states, between now and 2030. You've got aging population, meaning people are not going to retire. With the cost of living that's happening, people are going to be working beyond. Improving healthcare is going to make them more interested in turning up to work. Urbanization, people are shifting from rural, and that's happening fast in Asia. Youth, if I ask my children what type of jobs do you want to do, they don't know. They're probably 12 and 10. If you ask slightly older kids, they probably want to have 5 or 6 different jobs. And it's a contractual commercial arrangement where they're going to have multiple jobs. What does it mean for organized labor workforce in the future? What does it mean for businesses? How are you going to give them meaningful employment? Forget decent employment. You have massive disruption already happening, and the Director General mentioned about the platform economy. Uber doesn't have cars. Airbnb doesn't have hotels, right? The biggest school may not have campuses. Universities in Indonesia may not be in Indonesia, it might be somewhere else. So that's the extent of disruption that's happening today. So policymakers really have to pay heed to where is this technology going? This uncontrolled technology can be bad. The same technology is used to recruit ISIS, right? They're able to create a platform and share information and radicalize youth in any part of the world. Never before has an organization of that nature been able to recruit globally simultaneously, whether it's developed or developing countries. Same with interconnectedness leads to health. Health scares like Zika virus, how quickly it spreads because of connectedness. So if that's a problem statement, how can technology be part of the solution is really the question. And to me, that's where we need to look at demand and supply. One of the programs that we've been working on is Microsoft YouthWorks. It's been done in 13 countries. It creates a platform, digital platform, and I think the minister for Oman referred to this, which is how do you connect people with aspiration to work, the training that's needed, and the demand that's coming from small, medium enterprises or entrepreneurs in a particular country. Creating this kind of platform is very simple to set up. That's a platform economy, not only applied for running taxi industry or running hotel industry, that's being run to deliver employment and educational outcomes. So the whole employability can be turned on its head, right? But that requires careful consideration of policies and understanding. We talked about 1.9. Is it 1.9? Is it something else? Is it living wage? Again, use of data, use of evidence, better collection of data can be done today using technology. You can ask people in this part of the world, Indonesia, say how much does it cost to live, right? You can collect the answer pretty much at the click of a phone. You can say what's the living cost in Indonesia, far better than what Ministry of Finance or United Nations or UNDP can calculate over a period of months. France just mapped their entire country data of every household, every number on a map within 1 hour. That would have taken thousands of people walking around taking pictures. That's been done through technology. So there are many, many positive aspects. Where there is inequality, there's going to be exploitation. Women in technology is awful, right? The number of women participating in technology industry is really not where it should be. It's so true for other industries as well. How can technology overcome some of the social barriers? We have a program called Women for Windows in Bangladesh, where there are certain social restrictions in terms of how long a woman can work, where they can travel. There's safety issues that relates to that. How can they sit at home using technologies like Skype or virtual working from home? How can they participate in the workforce and get paid fair wages and get the equal respect? I'll give you one final example. Exploitation, and we talked about child labor. One of the worst things that happens in this part of the world, unfortunately, is human trafficking, and particularly exploitation from a sexual trade industry and child abuse. Every second, 500 images are traded online. 1.2 billion of images, sexually abused children, are being uploaded every day. And that trade is happening using the same technology that's bringing all the positives, connecting the buyers and sellers. And we, of course, can outsmart those people as well. So we have a thing called photo DNA, which matches all the blacklisted photographs with all the images that are being traded real time. And it's offered free to all the agencies that need to be interested in doing this, and catch the perpetrators and cut the supply chain. So the positives and the negatives, how do we play together? How do we create technology not as necessarily a barrier or something that's uncontrolled, but how do we get better control of it and create an influence where we can look forward to a future where every person, irrespective of where they come from, every organization, irrespective of size, have the same opportunity as everybody else.
Thank you. A lot of food for thought there, and I could see, Ms. Kromjong, you're dying to say something.
Yeah, I just want to, I just don't like the word disruption. Technology is disruption. I think where we should start with is embracing it. It's a reality, it's a fact, it will not go away. And fighting against it is not going to be part of the solution. So embrace it and let's make it work for us. Because the reality, the future of work is already here now. If you look into Asia, and if you look into, say, sectors in Asia that already are on its way of transforming, and transformation is also not a process that has a beginning and an end. Transformation is a process that will continue to transform. So we need to also embrace change as a continuous factor. And I believe that the difference between, say, the current transformation and the previous transformations, they will only go faster. So if we look into automotive industry, we are now talking about cars that don't even need a driver anymore. We're looking into cars that use different sources of fuel. We're looking into automation processes that need less manual labor. But therefore we need people that have different skills, that are being educated on different fields. We need especially people that are educated with regards to the so-called STEM subject, that are very, very important for everyone in this industry. But it does mean that we need to upskill and reskill our people. And I think that point was absolutely already stressed there before. If we look into the electronical and electronic sector, we are building more and more advanced products. It needs, therefore, also other type of people working at industry. It offers the opportunity for higher skilled labor, and higher skilled labor offers the opportunity for higher income. So it's something we need to embrace. We just need to make the people ready to be taken on in those jobs. If we look into the textile, clothing and footwear industry, again here, automation, robotization will take away some of the jobs. But let's put our efforts in making sure that those people that now are in those lower skilled jobs, that we can help them in making that transformation. Let's be real, it will not happen for everyone, but at least we should make the effort, and that's a joint effort. It's a business effort, it's a governmental effort, it's a workers' effort. Again, here the dialogue kicks in. If we look into retail, maybe not yet in each and every country here in Asia, but the company who I previously worked for really delivered e-commerce and was part of a company solution that was really bringing business. The same will happen here, but it will retire, again, different skills, technicians, engineers, IT. If you look into business process outsourcing or shared services, it is an industry here in Asia that has delivered 1 million jobs. It's a crucial industry, but if you look into shared service centers and if you look into the life cycle, they will always look for, say, labor arbitrage. But that's not the only thing they're looking for. They're also looking for quality, they're looking for efficiency, they're looking for high productivity. So higher wages can be offset by focusing on innovation, by focusing on higher productivity and on higher quality. So the future of work is really, really now we need to really make sure that we make those shifts from lower skilled to higher skilled labor. We need to also make sure that we keep work here that does require lower skilled labor, because that will be the reality. And we need to focus there on bringing the education in place. You have your solution there where you work virtually. e-learning, distant learning, and it offers opportunity. It offers opportunity for people that are disabled or for women to step into a workplace that is not accessible yet. And it gives them the opportunity to play that role. And this is needed with the aging population. Here in Asia, the aging population, other parts of the world, we cannot exclude 50% of the people. We need them. We need women, we need them in all levels, and we need them now. And we should start encouraging that immediately. Coming back to youth, I think that was also addressed a few times. I also have a son, and I want to have a good future for him. I think he has chosen the right study in biomedical engineering. But irrespective of that one, we want a good future for our kids. And we know that we have a huge youth bulge ahead of us. So we need them to be trained and be ready for the future, and not for the immediate future that what they learn now is applicable tomorrow and is fitting the business needs. But we need to learn them to continuously learn and to adapt continuously to the changing within the world of work, because that is what we need to prepare them for. The jobs they will enter in will probably likely disappear in 5 years, and they still need to be marketable and employable in that respect. And that is our joint responsibility. And then I would say in concluding remark here, if we look into apprenticeships as a model where we can give access to young people to what is needed in the world of work, that what is needed from a business perspective, where we can be sure that people learn the right skills that are needed for business at the places we need them, I think that's a great way to go for. And what we also need, and I'm coming back to migration, because very often migration is an issue, is positioned as an issue, and there are absolutely elements of migration that are an issue, and we should solve those. But labor migration is also a must for business. We will need to have the talents, flexibly at the places we want them, with, say, accessible labor markets, with easy accessible, I would say, relocation and migration procedures, because we need the talents, not all, at the places where business is. And I think I'm an example of what a labor migrant here myself. Probably I think the majority of us here on this panel might be a labor migrant. So let's make that work.
Thank you for that. You brought up a lot of really interesting points there about youth, about women in work. I want to pick up on that point about how we really need more women in the labor markets. But very quickly, anyone want to concur or counter what Ms. Kromjong has said?
I think one of the more important things also is the need for skills development here as well. And this has to be an ongoing program. And I think the Singapore example is a good one in that sense. That's upskilling and lifelong learning process, which the government actually promotes. And this is something that I think is going to be essential as we adjust to the changes that is going to come into the workplace. What we are seeing is more and more informal work now, rather than more and more people don't go to their workplaces or to the offices. We see technicians no longer have to go to work. They're just simply being told at home what to do and where to do it, and they're given a time frame. You go to the supermarkets, you check out yourself. You don't need a cashier, as we did before. So we do recognize the change, but I think it's important, as my colleague said, that the apprenticeship schemes are important. The skills development programs are absolutely essential to deal with this.
I think just adding on to that point, Singapore Workforce Development Authority is a very good example of how continuous learning, particularly for the currently employed and unemployed adult stage learning, is there. We also have to look at the other end of the spectrum in a learning perspective. Schools. What we're preparing school students today does not meet and is not likely to meet the industry demand in the future. Any amount of automation, and we talked about robotics and repetitive physical work being done by machines, that's still not going to take away a few things, which is flair for language. Second is creativity skills. Third is coming up with a business model through entrepreneurial skills. And also computational thinking. These are factors that needs to be baked into educational system today. Unfortunately, many jurisdictions and many countries are still lagging behind and having a blueprint that's going to be ready. But I think the common factor is it's a mindset. How do we create every country, every city, every community has a learning culture? I think that mindset needs to change. This is a social transformation. If we do that right, then we're likely to go very far. And just a final comment on inclusive growth. One of the things that we are seeing is, even in our own employment workforce, there are people with different abilities. Physically challenged, visually challenged, learning abilities, for example. And this is where I'm personally excited about what technology can do to bring. There are 250 million people with visual challenges. And that probably is going to increase thanks to technology again, right? People with visual challenges. We have now assist technologies as people walk through a city, camera lens, and a earpiece, giving them guidance on what they're actually seeing. Not just guiding them, but also sharing the experience as if they had perfect vision. Likewise, for people with learning disability in schools, you now have access to technology in any school with a laptop, where you can read the same page, same textbook at a very slow speed. And the characters look bigger for somebody with less learning speed and less learning capability compared to somebody who's pretty normal. So trying to bring the workforce of the future where it doesn't matter how able you are, whether it's mental ability or physical ability, technology again can pave a way. But it's a learning culture that we need to have.
Just a quick comment. I don't think this debate is going to be complete if we were not to also consider the people who actually make the technology that we use, yeah? The workers, coming back to this, yeah? I think most of that is done in this region of the world, yeah? China, India, Bangladesh, whatever. And the working conditions there, again, we're talking about no rights in those factories at all. And not only that, but the rate of suicide in many of these factories where workers actually come from the rural areas to work in the cities, in these factories, the conditions are atrocious. Yeah? That needs to be also addressed.
Lots of very broad topics being brought up here, but certainly a lot of the themes that have been coming up throughout the day, the need for skills, the need for keeping people employed, whether they be disabled, bringing women into the workforce. Now, I'm really crucially want to bring this up, obviously. I have a vested interest being a woman myself, but I see that time is getting away from us. I do want to open it up to the audience as well. But before that, let's take a look at this crucial, untapped resource of talent, women here in the Asia-Pacific region and the Arab states. And, of course, your estimates on the ILO reports that are coming out saying only 37% of all wage and salary work in this region essentially is held by women, compared to 63%, which is held by men. This is in 2013. Gender inequality, particularly pronounced in Southern Asia, and I'm sad to say, Minister, the Arab states, where women still hold just over 20% of all wage jobs. In the Arab states, it's just about 15%. And that's compared to Eastern Asia, where it's 41%. In Southeast Asia, it's about 40%. But these numbers are unacceptable because these numbers have to go higher. So what are the challenges and opportunities that will entail bringing women into the workforce in this region? Minister, I have to respond to that.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to remind you of a very important thing, which is the ILO Declaration of 2008, decent work for decent globalization. In the past panel, we have talked about the revolution of IT. It's something that happened and that occurred, but we have to look at it in a very practical manner. How can we, as partners, look at this technology, how we can use it and have employability because of it? I think that skills development is a matter that we have to focus on. Skills development will recreate jobs, because when people will lose some jobs, others will be created that will match the aspirations of the upcoming period. And this won't come unless the production companies and factors will adopt employability programs. So the challenges are there, but I would like to go back to what you have mentioned, bringing women to workplace. I think that rights are there because women and men have the same rights and obligations. And in the Arab region and in the Gulf countries, we are looking at this factor, especially in the public sector. And we have to differentiate here between the public and the private sector in our region because in the public sector we have more stability, and this is why we have more equality for men and women. For instance, in Oman, we have 50% of women working in the public sector, but in the private sector, this percentage is only 22%. In Oman, women participate or contribute to 40% of manpower, and women are holding today a lot of positions, whether at the executive levels or as directors and heads of companies, and they have proved their efficiency. They have participated in leadership programs, and they have really had great results. This is on one hand. The second, on the other hand, we have taken into consideration part-time jobs for women just because of their conditions, and also for the disabled people. We have given them all rights and good access to marketplace. And we are thinking seriously about the fact that the workplace is not a specific venue. We have to develop now our laws, our regulations, so that we can work from our homes in front of our screens and computers. And those people will contribute to manpower and to the economy with decent jobs. So I think that now job opportunities will be for women as much as they are for men. And the main challenge in the region is the quality of work in the private sector and private sector companies. For instance, in the Arab Gulf region, 50% of jobs in the private sector are in the construction industry, and this is very harsh for women. Women cannot work in the construction industry except for some technical light issues. This is why we have opened up other trade sectors for women, and we are trying to benefit here from technology and globalization, and we have tried to come up with programs in partnership with the private sector organizations and companies, and they give us some recommendations that we will include in a program of action that we will call the 2040 action plan, and we will try to have this program of work evaluated. Thank you.
Gratifying to see that much to include women in the workforce, but we know in reality all around the world, not just in the Middle East, but here in Asia, there are societal, cultural barriers for women in the workforce. Would anyone want to pick up on that and how we can potentially surmount that?
Yeah, I think I want to keep it short because I'm also very much aware that we want to have the audience also engaged here. So there was a lot of things to be said about this topic, but I think we really should stop looking for excuses. There's no excuse anymore. Let's just make it happen. 50% of our world population is women. They matter. They should be included everywhere. But we can, I think, start easily. For example, by committing everyone here in this room that in every panel that you will be in, that you will not participate in a panel that doesn't have women on panels. Easy start. You can also start within your companies, within your organizations, looking within your management teams. Make sure that in your management team you just don't accept anymore only male management teams, because that's where we need to set the culture. We need to set the culture at the top. If women can show and demonstrate everywhere at all levels there is opportunities for them, that's the best way forward. And we all here in this room can make it work.
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to pick up on your point. Can I get a pledge from all the gentlemen sitting on this particular high-level tripartite panel that they will only ever be on panels with women on them and refuse to be on panels which are just entirely male? Can I get a show of hands? Perfect. Minister? Okay, good, good. We've got a public declaration now. That's wonderful.
one good place to start would be this conference itself. On the average, we have 20% participation of women. We need to improve on that in this conference. I think it'd be a good place to start. We all at the ITUC, we have a policy in place where we have at least 30% woman participation there. And of course, that is something that we need to continue to work on to improve. And in most cases at the AP meetings, we usually surpass that now in most cases.
I think one of the things I would suggest is that we need to be a positive affirmation for women in technology. Right? If data is new currency, if data is the oil, if technology is going to disrupt and transform every industry, women are most likely to be negatively impacted of all things. So we need to be on the overdrive to bring women into technology. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills, women tend to participate less. That's true across the world, and more so for Asia. So I think for policymakers, for educational institutions, and for employers is how do we get more women to participate in technology?
Very quick point, Minister, before I open it up to the audience.
مداخلة بسيطة.
Just a quick comment. If you do not have 50% of female participation in the room, we may not have this panel. Yes, participation of women is important, but it's not only about the quantity, it's the quality. Of course, we appreciate women and they can participate as much as they can, but we may not reach 50%. But we commit ourselves to 30%, 40%, and we reach 50% if we can. And in the Gulf region and in Oman in particular, I would like to say that women have reached high positions and they have been present in civil society organizations, in ministries. So there is no discrimination of that type, but we have to give priority to quality. And now we are involving women, and the percentage of women in faculties and in schools is even higher than men. Thank you.
Now, at this stage, Director General, I wondered if you wanted to pipe in on this topic, because obviously you have taken this pledge specifically not to be on panels that don't include women. Of course, we need women of high quality, as the Minister has said, but obviously, ideally, you want more women on panels, more than at least just one, and certainly not just one who happens to be the moderator. I mean, would you not agree?
Well, yeah, and by the way, this pledge has already been subscribed to by the ILO, and we're respecting it at least here today. Huh? Yeah, representation matters a lot. I mean, on panels, in conference delegations, the ILO has that 30% minimum target for women's representation in its conferences. We struggle to get there. We struggle to get to our annual conference every June, getting to that 30% women's participation in national delegations has more often than not proven beyond us. And I sort of stand here and claim no responsibility because it's our member states who decides who comes to the conference. But just more generally, if I might say, I mean, unfortunately, the record of the Asia-Pacific region on labour market participation of women is poor. 32% percentage points gap between women and men's participation. I think it's the highest regional rate gap in the world. EDEM for the question of the pay gap. And I think you've got to do two things. I think firstly, I might be not using quite the right language, but I'll say it anyway to make my point. You've got to subdivide the causes of this situation between the intended and the unintended. You've talked, moderator, about societal, cultural views, which might find that women's participation in the world of work, or certain parts of the world of work, is not desirable, not wanted. I would regard that as an intended inequality outcome. The unintended has to do with the fact that despite the fact that the ILO's fundamental conventions against discrimination at work and on equal pay for work of equal value, they're 60 years old now. They've been ratified, they're amongst the most highly ratified conventions that we have. That universal acceptance of those principles, notwithstanding that, we have not got to equality at work. And that goes for every part of the world, every member state. Still, the gender pay gap globally is around the 18–20% mark on average. And we've got to dig out, I think, the sort of the hidden reefs, as I call them, those structural obstacles to equality, which are really difficult to address. I don't want to underestimate the challenges. It has to do with child rearing, family responsibilities. It has to do with the continuity of career paths. And one of the things we're trying to do in the ILO as we move towards our centenary is to innovate. I don't think moving towards full equality is just doing more of the same thing that we've been doing for the last 50 years. It's not just turning up the volume and playing the same music. We've actually got to innovate, identify these structural reefs, obstacles. I think technology can help us a great deal if we use it properly, and go the rest of the way, the last mile.
Thank you. Now, one of the things you brought up there was you putting the onus on the member states. So let's hear from the member states now. I am wary of the fact that it's just after 6 o'clock. We've got till 6:30, but we do want to hear from each and every one of you. So can I open it up now to the audience? Now, you've heard us talk about a lot of very pressing issues, lots of different areas, of course, not just gender, but issues of work skills development, technology, the need to lift people out of poverty. So these are big pressing issues. Can I ask that you say where you're from, and please keep your question fairly short as well, in the interest of time. So can we have questions from the member states? Is there a hand up somewhere? Right at the back, there, yes. Is this Hong Kong?
Yeah, Hong Kong. Thank you. Lee Cheuk-yan, Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions. I want to echo Felix's point about the right to freedom of association and collective bargaining. Of course, we can talk a lot of beautiful words like inclusive growth, decent work, sharing of the economic growth. But what happened on the ground is completely different from this beautiful rhetoric. And what happened on the ground, I would want to say is, really, there are more inequality, there are more precarious employment, which do not really give people stable employment. And in Hong Kong case, we have the freedom of association, we have the right to organize unions, but we don't have any legislative framework or machinery for collective bargaining. So what happened is sometimes an employer will come to the worker and say, oh, we want to change the working condition, we want to reduce your wages, lengthen your working hours, without consent, consultation of the unions. And in some countries in Asia Pacific, workers are not even allowed to organize independent union. So my question is to Guy Ryder, our DG, is that, sometimes I'm worried that with all this beautiful rhetoric about inclusive growth, we have buried the very fundamental problem of non-compliance with very fundamental labor rights to collective bargaining and freedom of association. So is it that ILO somehow, I would say, because it's so difficult to move this ahead, so maybe we should go into other areas where it's easier to make progress. But I would suggest that maybe it's easier to make some progress whereby government, employer, and workers can agree on some aspect. But this very fundamental issue seems to be lost in the ILO work. And very often, maybe it's because it's really difficult to move on. Is it because of that that we are forgetting this very fundamental right and moving to other stuff? Thank you.
Thank you. Director General, yes? The question was aimed at you.
Well, the answer is a very simple answer. It's not forgotten, it's not left aside. We're not moving onto other stuff and neglecting what you quite rightly say, Brother Lee, is a fundamental question. I referred to these issues when I spoke from the podium not very long ago. And as I'm sure you know, the ILO supervisory system is perhaps the most, one of the most effective in the multilateral system. I don't think I'm saying that out of any sense of egocentricity. The Committee on Freedom of Association, I think, has clocked up complaints against member states submitted mostly by trade unions, but also by employers' organization. We've clocked up 3,000 cases, and we have a record of advocating strongly and I think effectively for freedom of association, for collective bargaining, and to dispel any doubts that there may be, my view, and I think that this is reflected both in the programs of our organization, it's also reflected in the UN 2030 development agenda, by the way, the view is very clearly that freedom of association and collective bargaining, we tend to call them not only fundamental rights, but enabling rights, because they enable workers or employers to claim their fair share of the benefits of growth and productivity are a sine qua non. I mean, you don't go anywhere, or you don't go where we need to get to in any case, without their full respect. Are there major obstacles? Is this difficult work? Well, of course it is in some cases. It gets highly political, it gets highly contentious. But it is absolutely part of the responsibilities of the ILO and those who work in the ILO to make sure that these issues are not, conveniently swept under the carpet in order to ensure a quiet life, because these are the rights that actually define the working lives of the people that we're here to work for more than any others.
Thank you for that. Actually, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit further on that question, perhaps flip it a little bit, and there's obviously a question for Mr. Anthony. How can workers' organizations themselves try to do more to ensure collective bargaining? We know the onus is not just on the ILO, but it's for every single stakeholder in this, workers' organizations, employers, etc. So is there a way out from this conundrum with many Asia-Pacific countries really not allowing workers to have the ability to collectively bargain?
Well, as DG has said, I think we have the standard setting mechanism and also the complaints procedure within the ILO machinery that can actually deal with that wherever there is a violation or a denial of collective bargaining. Let me just say that the members of the ILO are actually obligated to ensure, well, even if they don't ratify Convention 87 and 98, they are obligated to comply with those conventions. Yeah? And what we see in this region is that is not happening. And the unions must take these complaints to the ILO, to the complaints machinery, and deal with them at that level. That's one area. But of course, what we also see in the region is an increase in brutal repression of unions in the region. I gave some examples when I spoke about it earlier today, where we see governments actually brutally trying to suppress the rights of workers who actually demand for collective bargaining or freedom of association. And that is ever more increasing in the region. We see this in the Asia-Pacific region. We see this in the Arab regions as well. I could name countries, and there's a long list of them. So there needs to be greater focus, emphasis by the office of the ILO, by the workers' organizations, by the employers, that we need to promote and respect these core conventions, and in particular 87 and 98. There can be no collective bargaining if there's no social dialogue as well. We've talked about that, and we need to continue to attempt to promote more tripartism in the region, greater social dialogue, and that's the only way out.
And indeed, I guess it's part of what we're doing here on stage right now. Any more questions from the audience? I'm wary of the fact that I have about 15 more minutes. Is that a question there? Yes. And I'm not sure which country you're from, but just remember to keep your question fairly brief in the interest of time.
Yeah, I want to speak in Bahasa Indonesia. Please use your...
Yes. I'm going to try to understand it.
Now,
my name is Said Iqbal from Indonesia. I couldn't hear, sorry, I couldn't hear, sorry. Can I? No, I cannot hear, sorry. Anyone can help? Okay, now. Okay, now it's okay. So I'm Said Iqbal from KSPI, Indonesia. So almost of the governments in the Asia Pacific, the ASEAN Pacific, they are pursuing the economic growth as a basis to measure the success of the economy in a country, and also in inviting investment to actually pursue the economic growth. However, at the same time, there are also many in Asia Pacific countries that the Gini ratio index, the inequality gap in income between the rich and the poor is getting wider and wider. It means that when the economy is growing and the multinational companies, they already profit, there's no redistribution to the workers because the inequality which is increasing, just like in Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Korea, and other South Asian countries, India. And the question is, how then the ILO can make sure the steps, the measures to also press down the Gini ratio? So just for you to give you an example, SGD and ILO Centenary says that one of it is the end of poverty. And it was also said how the World Bank measures the poverty is by 1.9 US dollar per day. So someone will be called poor. And in Indonesia, it's even lower. Someone is called poor when they make $1, $1 a day. Does it make sense in Indonesia that someone making $30 a month and they are not called poor? This is not, it doesn't make sense. So how to make sure that countries in Asia Pacific who try to lower the standard of poverty? Thank you.
That question, obviously a very difficult one to answer, but how do you narrow the gap between rich and poor in these countries? I know we tried to address the issue of the amount people make earlier, because you can address it through technology, through big data. There's all these technicalities in terms of how to address this problem. But how do you fundamentally address this issue? Because it comes down to trying to narrow this growing gap between rich and poor.
Yeah, I don't propose to revisit the question about the numbers, except perhaps just for one thing. We set these, or the World Bank, the ILO, whoever it is, they set these sort of minimum thresholds for being out of poverty, and they're controversial, and we all also have to remember that many of the people who, by measurement of those thresholds have escaped poverty, are hovering dangerously closely just above the thresholds of poverty, but are very vulnerable to falling back again. So we should not take, I don't say we don't take those thresholds seriously, they matter, but nothing is permanent, and we have to keep working to make sure that people who move up stay up. But the question is, how do we do this? And two things I think might be useful to recall. One is that the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda, has a specific goal about reducing inequality, improving the situation of the bottom 40%, which is, by the way, what the World Bank is also focusing upon. So we have, I think, now, and it's not always been the case, let's not take it for granted, an international policy consensus that inequality has reached unacceptable levels and action is required to reduce inequalities. So this is something where we have a consensus upon. And between parentheses, let's recall as well that in richer countries, where we still have poverty, poverty tends to be defined in relative terms as a percentage of average, or better said, median income. In Europe, in advanced economies, you're in poverty if you're below 60% of median income levels. So inequality and poverty issues are closely related. But how do we address these things? We've talked about it all afternoon. The best redistributive systems, the societies which are able to ensure a more equitable distribution of income and indeed of wealth, are those which have well-developed labour market institutions. Collective bargaining is one of the most potent instruments available to us to ensure that when productivity goes up, the benefits are fairly shared between workers and employers. This region, like practically, in fact, every other region, has seen over the last 30 years a decline in the labour share of national income. That is to say, overall, less is going to workers, less is going to wages and salaries. Minimum wages is the other instrument that we have. And in this region, where collective bargaining tends to be relatively weak in terms of coverage and efficacy, I think a lot of weight falls on minimum wage mechanisms, including here in Indonesia. And we heard the Vice President earlier this afternoon suggesting that there would be merit in a regional minimum wage, which is perhaps taking the story a little bit further.
Minimum wage is always an interesting debate. One more question. Yes, there. The gentleman in the middle. Yes, I'm pointing right at you. No? Oh, there's this one. Oh, yes. Sorry, the lady in the front. Sorry.
Thank you.
And then we'll hear from the gentleman.
Thank you. Distinguished panelists of this high-level dialogue and distinguished participants of this regional meeting. I'm Mabel Lee, coming from the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Just now we have a discussion about the International Labour Convention number 87 and number 98. I wish to supplement some information about the application of these two conventions in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The International Labour Convention number 87 is applied to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The Hong Kong SAR government fully recognizes the importance of protecting our labour force against any acts of anti-union discrimination and is committed to safeguarding the rights of workers in this respect. And likewise, for the International Labour Convention number 98, it is also applied to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The Hong Kong SAR government has already taken measures appropriate to local conditions to encourage and promote voluntary negotiation between employers and employees or the respective organizations on a voluntary basis. Views of the community, indeed, in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region regarding compulsory collective bargaining is quite divided at the moment. Anyhow, the Hong Kong SAR government strives to promote voluntary collective bargaining. We promote workplace consultation to different enterprises through different meetings and so on. The last one I also like to add is that, well, the Hong Kong SAR government is fully committed to the principle of tripartism. Through the operation of our high-level Labour Advisory Board, which is high-level and representative tripartite consultative body to advise on labour matters. And we are very, very happy today that we have our tripartite team here. We have the employer and the worker members of our Labour Advisory Board coming to the this very important Asian Pacific regional meeting. And every regional meeting, we come as a tripartite team. And likewise for the annual International Labour Conference. And so we are really fully committed to tripartism. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that statement. It wasn't quite a question, but I guess it was a statement in reaction to the question we had just a little bit earlier. and of course the reality on the ground that many insist is very difficult. Mr. Anthony, do you
Yes,
want to respond to that?
I note the intervention that's been made about Convention 98 and the fact that there's no enabling laws in Hong Kong that actually require employers and unions to collectively bargain. If the special administrative region is to comply with 98, they need to have enabling laws in place. You cannot have voluntary collective bargaining. It simply does not work.
Okay. And there was another question in the middle. Yes, the gentleman there. Yes. Gentleman in the tie, you've got your hand up. Yes, I'm pointing at you. Right in the middle. And just very brief question in the interest of time. We just have a few more minutes. Thank you.
I shall be speaking in Arabic. I am from Palestine. I feel and wish to express my deep and sincere respects to all these statements we have heard regarding the high standards prevailing in our countries in Asia and in the Arab region. However, regretfully, I find myself as a Palestinian forced to speak about the Israeli occupation. We suffer an entirely different situation. I represent millions of Palestinian workers in occupied Palestine, where the occupation is destroying their employment possibilities. I do not know how we could resort to your experience and to your help to assist our workers to survive and overcome this dismal situation. I had hoped in you to be able to participate in your distinguished high-level debates. However, we are unable to see the reality of this dialogue in our own territory. I am thinking of the unemployment conditions, the pervasive unemployment that has, in fact, requires us to appeal to you to call on the respected state of Israel to respect and abide by international decisions in this field. Shortly, in a few words, I would like to say we in Palestine are indeed attempting to establish and adopt many laws regarding labor rights, social security, and so on and so forth. However, occupation is the main obstacle that has impeded enactment. One point I wish to stress, a word of thanks to the ILO, which has presented and provided and continues to provide assistance in our occupied territories. We are nevertheless that party that needs the most assistance from the ILO. I do not wish to go into details. ILO is best informed of our problems. This quick intervention is simply aimed at raising our voice here in this environment. We feel in that far western part of the continent, on the shores of the Mediterranean, feel that we need your voice, we need your help. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Of course, very politically sensitive situation, an ongoing situation, and some would say almost an intractable situation. But Director General, you want to respond to that?
Very briefly, Moderator. Just firstly to welcome the presence of the Minister amongst us and thank him for his reminder about our organisation's responsibilities towards our Palestinian friends. We've discussed these issues many times. We send a fact-finding mission every year to the territories to try to better understand the realities and work out ways to react to them. And I do hope that in the year ahead, I will have the opportunity, Minister, to come to visit you on the ground so we can discuss these things further. We know there's very important developments in the field of social security that you're enacting, and I want you to know, and I want to appeal to all our member states to help us in the provision of the assistance and support that our Palestinian friends need, and which makes a very strong claim on our solidarity.
All right, thank you for that. Now, we literally do have just 4 more minutes. And I thought very quickly, since we've had such an excellent panelists here, to get just a last statement from each of them. And it's interesting, one of you mentioned that we've been using a lot of very beautiful words up here, that we're trying to have this tripartite, high-level conversation. But really, once we leave this room, once we take a look at what's happening on the ground, is there any real change? Will all of us come out of this room, come out of this meeting, and perhaps 4 years down the line, if we're meeting again with the ILO, will there be any real change in the Asia, Pacific, and Arab regions? So very briefly, a quick 30 seconds from all of you. Are you optimistic or pessimistic we will achieve that change? We started out talking about 249 million jobs and whether we can achieve that by 2030. Is this an elusive ideal, or are we just going to see social unrest? Can we achieve it? So let's start with, well, actually, let's start with Mr. Puthucode at the end, and then we'll end with you, Director General.
Yeah, when a visually challenged woman in Bangladesh walks up to the stage to collect Entrepreneur of the Year award, leveraging technology, I am a born optimist.
Well, what I believe, and I agree with my other colleague, is that this is not the time for fancy slogans anymore. This is the time for us to focus on the fundamentals in the region and to focus on results that we achieve. It's very well to say we will achieve, this is the decade for decent work, and what we see now is a huge shortfall. Now, we need to seriously focus and deliver on the goods that we see as our major issues in the region.
There is major issues to overcome, but we will overcome them. I think with all the creativity and the entrepreneurial spirit in this region, there's a really good opportunity. What we need is a mature social dialogue and maturity from all parties. And I think you also need to acknowledge that there is room for improvement on all parties there to be taking place. But I think what we need also is, and I'm just echo what I already said earlier, is there is a lot of regulation already out there. We don't need new regulations. We need implementation of regulation. We need enforcement.
نعم متفائلون.
Yes, I am an optimist and reaffirm and stress, one, the need to develop social dialogue between production partners. Two, we must develop skills and capabilities. This can only be achieved through developing vocational training in the manpower. Thank you.
Like the Minister, I'm an optimist as well, but I'm a realist enough to conclude that everything depends on us. You know, it depends if we are going to act on the things we're talking about. And allow me just to sort of finish by a thought that came to me this morning watching the BBC. The BBC reminded me that 32 years ago this week, the Bhopal tragedy happened in India, and we all have memories of the horror of that tragedy. But from that tragedy, the ILO adopted a convention on major industrial accidents. We acted to make sure that that tragedy did not happen again, and that's had real effects. And by extension, well, it was 3.5 years since Rana Plaza, and I look to my friends from Bangladesh. We've worked together since Rana Plaza. Out of that adversity, we decided to act together to make sure that buildings were safer, to make sure that labor inspection worked properly, to make sure that training was in place, to make sure that legislation was appropriate. So when we decided to act, I think we made a difference. But it depends on us.
Well, you heard it there, ladies and gentlemen. An excellent panel discussion from our very high-level delegates there. And I guess the main thrust of the message is there is optimism. We can get there. We need to work together, and we need to make it happen beyond this room and beyond this meeting. So I look forward, perhaps, to see some of these changes implemented, some of these conventions ratified at the next ILO meeting that will take place in 4 years, I believe. Come back and we'll talk about it. Thank you all. And once again, a big round of applause to our wonderful panelists. And it's 6:31. I'm only a minute late, but I will hand it back to our chairman of the conference, of course, the Minister of Manpower for Indonesia. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lind, for moderating, this great session. I see, a lot of enthusiasm in this forum, to explore and discuss many important issues, for the future of work and, some of the challenges that we have to tackle all together. Ladies and gentlemen, we also thanks to all our panelists for leading this very interesting discussion and all contributions. And I now have the pleasure of reminding all the participants that my government is hosting a reception this evening in the Uluwatu lobby at 7 p.m. here in the Nusa Dua Convention Center. You are, of course, all cordially invited to join us for a pleasant moment of relaxation and contact and to enjoy some excellent music and traditional dance performances. Of course, after having this dynamic discussion, you need more relax in this place as well. So we'll find clear the directions outside in the hall, and with your permission, the seating is closed. Thank you.